you so much for joining me in the Louie File. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, I'll just give you the title. The title is called Weaned from the Scene. As people, specifically Christians, but as people, we all have to be weaned from the scene. We have to learn and discover what it means to walk by faith and not by sight. Now, you might ask, well, why do we have to learn that, Louie? Well, because we're all in the same boat in one sense. And if you want to find out what that boat is, it's found in Genesis 3, verse 7 primarily. The story where Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden tree based on a promise from a liar. A liar, the liar, promised them that the day they ate of that tree that their eyes would be open and they would be as God. Well, in one sense, it was true. Their eyes were opened, but they were also closed. And what I mean is, their earthly eyes were opened, but their spiritual eyes were closed. In fact, the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 4 that they were not just closed, but they were blinded. Let me read a couple verses for you. Genesis 3, verse 7, it says, right after they ate of this forbidden tree, it says, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves loin coverings. So right away their eyes were opened, but the first thing they saw was that they were naked. They became ashamed of themselves. So they went from a God consciousness, if you will, to a self-consciousness, which brought on shame and guilt and fear and anxiety and some kind of just need to cover themselves. So if you look down a few more verses in Genesis 3, God starts to come to them asking, where are you? And in verse 11 it says, and he said, who told you that you were naked? Well, let's back up to verse 10. He said, I heard the sound. Well, I need to back up even more. Look at verse 9. I'm sorry. This is proof that this is on the fly. And I've got some verses laid out, but I'm not trapped in them. We need to get context. Genesis 3 verse 9 says, then the Lord called to the man and said to him, where are you? He said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? Right away, God starts quizzing him about this. So his eyes are open, but he becomes fearful and anxious and ashamed because he sees that he's naked. Now, we could go into a long discussion and argument or debate about what does that really mean, because the Bible told us prior to this that they were naked before and not ashamed. But the idea here is, for my point today, is that his eyes were open to the earthly self-consciousness that came about because they believed a lie. So if you look now, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 3 and 4, it says, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So there was a blindness that came in with this deception, which makes sense, right? I mean, if you were believing a lie or if you've been deceived, then you don't know the whole picture. You don't get the whole truth. So if you think about mankind's problem, obviously it's a sin problem, but the sin problem brings in a blindness and a deception. We start to believe what we see, what we feel, what we think, and sometimes it's real, sometimes it's true, and a lot of times it's simply not. It's not the real deal at all. I want to give you a couple of examples of how Jesus started to correct this. He started to steer mankind, the ones that were willing to listen, toward the unseen, toward the eternal, toward the true, toward the spirit, which a blind man, even though he might be religious, just doesn't have the equipment to see. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul says that the natural man just can't receive the things of God. So we have to have spiritual discernment, which only comes about by the Spirit himself being within us. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Matthew 11, verse 7, Jesus says, as these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. This is John the Baptist. He says, what did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Those who wear soft clothing are in kings' palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet. Yes, I tell you, and one who is more than a prophet. So he's asking them, well, what did you go to see when you went to go see John? What did you go to see? What did you go expecting to see? See, John, as we call him, John the Baptist, threw a wrench in everything because he was born of a priest, and he was in line to be a priest at some point. Well, but rather than being in the temple, wearing the priestly robes and doing all of the things that the people thought of as priestly and godly in the temple, he was in a wilderness. He was in a desert, and he was dunking people in a river. And it was nothing about what they expected. So look in Matthew 3, verse 4. Look at what they did see. Matthew 3:4, it says, Now John himself had a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. That is not the traditional priestly robe and garments, or diet for that matter. But everybody was going out to see who this guy was. What is he screaming, going on about out here in the wilderness? Now, for those of you that know a little bit about the Old Testament, you might notice that this camel's hair and this leather belt sounds kind of familiar. And I didn't look these verses up, but you can do that as your own homework. But Elijah, I think Elijah had a very similar appearance. And in fact, Jesus calls John Elijah in a sense. At one point, he points to John as that Elijah that was prophesied to come before the great day of the Lord at the end of Malachi, I think it is. Which is another study altogether, but interesting if you want to look into it. All right, so one of the things John did was he startled people, but then he also started people to think differently about God and what was really going on, because the temple had become completely corrupted. The priests were abusing their privilege, and you can see that because that's why Jesus turned over the tables and cleaned out the temple. He said, you're a bunch of thieves and robbers. You don't have the interest of the people in mind. You only have your own interest in mind. Now that's not good. So John is out in the desert screaming, repent, change your mind about this whole thing. I mean, you need to change your mind about the whole system that you have built up around this temple. Jesus even said, tear it all down. And they thought he meant the building itself. But John, the first chapter or so of John, actually says he meant the temple of the body that he was in. So Jesus is doing a major shift. And it starts with John and his appearance and everything shocking the people. So then later on, he tells them, let's look in John chapter 7. Most people will say, you're not supposed to judge, you're not supposed to judge. That's one of the favorite mantras of Christians and lost people. You're not supposed to judge. But look what it says in John 7:24. Jesus says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. In other words, he's saying, don't make a judgment just based on what you see, because what you see is generally not the whole truth. And that is so right. We jump to conclusions. We make judgments about the way people are dressed, the way they look, their hair, their tattoos, their weight, just the things they say and do, and we just automatically assume we know about that person, we know what they believe, and they're wrong and I'm right. So he's saying don't make just a judgment according to what your eyes see. But he does say make a righteous judgment. So look in John 7 verse 17. It says, if anyone's willing to do his will, talking about God's will, he will know of the teaching, whether it is of God or whether I speak for myself. So if you really want to know God's call or God's viewpoint on something, then you just have to be willing to do what God says. All right, so see, God knows what our willingness factor is. He knows where our intention is. He gets right down in there, even in places we can't see. So if we really have a willingness, a desire to do what He says, then He will reveal the truth to us. We just have to start longing and loving what He longs for and loves. And as we do that, we will start to know whether this is of God or whether it isn't, whether this is righteous judgment, or if it's just a judgment according to appearance. It's called discernment of the Holy Spirit, is what the Bible calls it. And in Psalm 51:6, it tells us that God desires truth in our inner man, in our inner parts. If we just get really honest with ourselves, then we will be able to be honest with others and open and honest with God. And you might be surprised what He shows us about ourselves and the world around us. But the thing is then at that point we become a safe person to be shown these things. See, when we're really honest about ourselves and we see our weakness and our powerless state, and we see our bent toward doing the wrong thing, then somehow it changes us and we start to realize our dependence on Christ. And then when we really realize our dependence on Christ, we start to give other people a break. We start to, it doesn't mean that we are okay with sinfulness, but what we do is we show mercy and grace in their direction because we recognize and love the grace and mercy that God has shown toward us. So we become someone who is safe to be shown these things. See, God's not going to give us a bunch of insight about ourselves and our world and other people so that we can beat them up over it. That's not how He does things. And I am so thankful for that. So now let's look ahead a little bit in John 14. Jesus is telling His disciples that He's about to go away, but He's not going to leave them fatherless or as orphans. But He's going to give them another one, a helper, a comforter, the Spirit of truth, who will not only be with them, but will be in them. And this is a big deal. See, this is where Jesus is about to go to the cross, and He's preparing the disciples to receive His Spirit after He returns back to the Father. And He's telling them a lot of things that the Spirit is going to do for and in them. And He says on a couple of occasions, I'm telling you this now so that when this takes place, you will believe. See, you have to believe to receive. You have to trust Jesus Christ in order to take the Spirit within. You have to say, oh, that's right, that's true, that's good, that's God. So John 14:16 through 20, I'm going to just read these real quickly. I will ask the Father, and He will give you another helper, that He may be with you forever. That is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it does not see Him or know Him, but you know Him, because He abides with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you. After a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me, because I live, you will live also. Look at this. In that day, you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. So He's saying, look, get ready. You're going to have a spiritual eyesight that's been given to you when you receive the Spirit of truth. The people of the world can't receive because they don't know me. They're not believing in me. See, they're still in that state of blindness brought on early on in the chapters of Genesis. And the God of this world, the satanic mind, is blind to the truth of God. Now, I'm not saying the devil doesn't know certain things spiritually or heavenly. Obviously he does, but he doesn't fully know God's plan, or else He wouldn't have let Jesus Christ be crucified. Let me show you something real quick. Look in 1 Corinthians. It's pretty astounding. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Let's see. 1 Corinthians 2, 7 and 8. It says, but we speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom, which God predestined before the ages to our glory. The wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood, for if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. How about that? See, the devil and his minions would not have inspired the religious leaders in Rome to crucify Jesus if they would have known that in that act of crucifying Jesus was going to be their own demise. That the covers that are on our eyes will be taken off that way. They would have never done that. So God does have His way of keeping the mysteries, of using this blindness that was in part to accomplish something that He wouldn't have accomplished otherwise. It's such a great and brilliant God we serve. He is so wise. So Jesus promises that the Spirit would be in His disciples, and the world can't see or know about this as of yet because they haven't put their faith and trust in me. And that's how you get these spiritual eyes. You become awakened to the Spirit. You become aware become wise to the unseen. And you know what? It generally takes a lot of roughing up, I think, on the outside to awaken and to give us the insight on the inside. I want to share something with you now in 2 Corinthians 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, great chapter. The Apostle Paul, he tells us in verse 4 that the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so they just can't see. But he says, but we don't preach ourselves, we preach Christ and Him crucified. That's the way we get the lights turned on in the unbeliever as they receive the message, the truth. And so in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 8, 9, and 10, he's talking about how everyone struggles. We're afflicted, we're perplexed, we're persecuted, we're struck down, but we're not destroyed. We're not once and for all taken out by these perplexities, these afflictions. But we have within us, as believers, Christ. We have Christ in this earthen vessel, so the excellency of the power will be from Him and not from us. So we're always carrying around this death within us so that life could be produced for you. So as a believer, now that we've been awakened and our eyes are open and we're making righteous judgments and we're Christ conscious again instead of self-conscious, it's not that we don't see or acknowledge the pain and suffering that comes our way on a human level every day, living in the state we're living in, but we start to see that it can be used, and we can reverse what's going on around us. What's coming to us may feel like it's killing us, but through the Spirit of God in us, He reverses this, and He actually, in a miraculous way only God can do, He uses these very things to produce and bring life to others. So Paul's whole attitude became, everything that's happening to me, whether it's good or bad, whether I judge it to be comforting or afflicting, it's all coming to me for your benefit. That's what he tells the Corinthians at the beginning of 2 Corinthians in the first chapter. He says all this stuff is for your comfort. Everything, he saw himself as taking all this in, and that God transmitted. A good example is a tree. A tree, the green leaves of the trees take in carbon monoxide. They take in these poisonous things outside of the tree, but then it is transmuted or transfigured, or I don't know what the proper word is. There's photosynthesized. I don't know what the right word is, but it takes in this carbon monoxide, which is poisonous to us, and it changes it. It transforms it into oxygen for us. So this very poisonous negative thing comes into the tree, but the tree has this way of turning it into life and breath for those around it. And that's what Paul's telling us here in 2 Corinthians 4. He says we're constantly being delivered over to death for your sake. So look in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 16, 17, and 18. We're coming to the close of this video, and these are some fabulous words here. 2 Corinthians 4:16 says, therefore we do not lose heart. We don't lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. See, we're learning how to walk by faith and not by sight. We're learning how to walk in the Spirit and not in our fleshy feelings, even when being beaten up. And these things are actually, if you get these new eyes, these new spiritual eyes, and you'll start to see that these momentary light affliction, these things aren't working against us, they're actually working for us, because they're producing in us some kind of weighty glory far beyond whatever these painful situations and trying times we are in. It's producing something in us that's way better, far more better. It's an eternal thing that it's producing. Temporary suffering, when seen correctly, will produce eternal glory through our life and in our life. And this is why 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, we look not at the things which are seen. See, Jesus said, make a right judgment. Don't judge by appearance. And of course, in his day, then people would have been like, I don't know what you mean. I don't know how to do that. Well, because they didn't have spiritual discernment. But now, in 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul, on the other side of the cross, on the other side of the resurrection, the ascension, and the pouring out of the Spirit, the discernment of God is within you, Christian. If you have this Holy Spirit, then that's what makes you a Christian. Christ in you, Christ is your life. That's what makes you what we would call a Christian. But the problem is we haven't really acknowledged, or we haven't seen, or haven't understood what all that entails. But we're learning to look at the things which are not seen. Now, see, that seems kind of crazy, but you know what? The whole of life can only be lived in a paradoxical state, because we just can't. We can't make a lot of opposites in our lives seem to make sense. We just can't. But they do come together somehow, some way. Our inner spirit man takes the lead role, and our outer fleshy, temporary, intellectual man, if you will, takes a back seat. I've heard it put this way, and it seems kind of like childlike, but it's good. Our soul body is the caboose, and our spirit, joined to God's Spirit, is the engine. See, in the fall, it was reversed. Adam essentially turned inside out, to where he was being led around by his temporary fleshy humanity, and that the Spirit was going, hey, what about me? So Christ comes and he reverses it, and he sets up he puts his Spirit within us, joined to our human spirit. Now we're raised back up again. Our dead human spirit has been brought back to life by way of his resurrection power within us, and now we start to see things differently. We're awakened. We're born anew. But there is a weaning that has to happen. The disciples, Jesus kept telling them, look, it's better for you that I go away. And they're thinking, no, it isn't. How can it be better for us if you go away? And he goes, I'm telling you, when I go back to the Father, the Spirit will come. And he's kind of winking at them. It's really going to be me and my Father, and we're all one, and we're all going to move into you, so that we're not only going to be with you, but we're going to be in you forever. See, he was in a temporal bodily state next to them, and they didn't want him to leave, because they didn't understand that the only way that he could move into them was by Spirit. And in the state that they were in at that time, it couldn't happen. He had to go through the cross, be dead, be crucified, buried, raised back, and ascended back to the Father. Then the Holy Spirit could be poured out and in a receivable form for the believer. Then our eyes are opened. So there's a weaning off of the scene that has to take place. You know, and this is in a greater scale. Let me share one more thing with you, and then I'll let you go for this time. In Hebrews 12, verses 26 through 29, God's telling us that He's going to shake everything up again. And let me just read these verses. Hebrews 12, 26 through 29. It says, and his voice shook the earth then, but now he's promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude, by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe. So it's God's plan to shake us off of the seen temporary realm. It's His plan to do that. So if we started to really see that and notice that a lot of the hardship and trouble and changes that happen in our life, we'll start to see them working for us, because our plan, our goal, and our idea is the same as God's. We have the same sight that He has, which is to make us one and completely open and aware with Christ, and walking according to faith, walking according to His Spirit, walking according to this new mind and this new inner man. Oh, it's so great. And then all of a sudden we realize that there's nothing, absolutely nothing that happens to us is going to thwart God's plan for us. The only thing that causes us real problems is when we refuse to see what God is showing us. That's the big problem, isn't it? And we revert back to seeing with these temporal, earthly eyes. And we become self-focused again, self-conscious again, like Adam did. So the remedy is always the same. Walk in the Spirit, you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh. And in Hebrews it says, turn your eyes on Jesus. As we look to Him and make Him the focus, all these other things don't go away, but they become less and less important to us. They take a back seat. Oh, and that's what I hope for you, that the earthly, temporal, seen realm starts to fade into the background, and the heavenly, eternal, unseen becomes more and more clear to you as the days go by. Man, so have you been weaned off the scene? I hope so. All right, I thank you for your time today, and I will catch you on the next Louie File. I'll see you then.